Hi, everybody. I'm Jeffrey Phillips. I'm Associate Pastor of Winnetka Congregational Church and a member of our church's Green Team. And we're so glad that you've joined us this evening. We will be led tonight a little bit by myself, but mostly by the co-chairs of our church's Green Team. And they are Liz Kunkel and Steve Hewells, and you'll meet them in a moment. Joining us tonight are people from the Go Green teams of Kenilworth Union Church, Winnetka Congregational Church, and the Go Green teams of Go Green Winnetka, Go Green Kenilworth, the wonderful League of Women Voters of Winnetka, Northfield, and Kenilworth, and people from the Women's Exchange. And there might be some other groups that I'm not aware of tonight, but we're certainly glad that you are part of our circle this evening. There might be a time when Steve will unmute you if he thinks that a comment or question that you need to express would be better done by you orally, but otherwise do try to rely on comments through our chat function tonight. This session is being recorded, including the chat, and the video and audio recording will be available through the Winnetka Congregational Church YouTube channel sometime before December. Actually, sometime in the next 7 days, I promise you. And again, Liz Kunkel is our principal facilitator tonight, and I would like to turn it over to her. Liz.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Thank you everyone for joining us. We are so excited to have you tonight. We're honestly, like Jeffrey said, we're so grateful to have so many people interested in this topic. As Jeffrey also said, I'm Liz Kunkel. I'm a member of the Winnetka Congregational Church Green Team. Our third Green Team, Church Green Team member tonight is Steve Hewells. I am also the founder and president of Go Green Winnetka, which is one of a network of Go Green citizen organizations in our environmental organizations in our area. I'm also an environmental and forestry commissioner in Winnetka, and I'm also an employee of a compost company, woman-based, Evanston-based compost company. So I come at sustainability from the waste, recycling, and compost side of things. So this program tonight really became sort of part of a follow-up to a couple other programs we had done previously, starting about a year ago, a little over a year ago, November of 2019, a similar combination of groups, faith houses, Citizen Go Green groups, and the League of Women Voters hosted an in-person movie screening of the movie, The Story of Stuff, which is a 20-minute video regarding some of the foundation that's then followed up on in this Story of Plastic movie that we're talking about more specifically tonight. But at the same time, we discussed The Story of Stuff, the movie, which was released in 2007. A reading group that some of us are a part of also discussed the book called The Story of Stuff, which was published a few years later in 2010. And I was really surprised at how in-depth that book was. It was quite dense and quite really informative, but I was equally surprised at what a page turner it was. And so I highly recommend The Story of Stuff if you haven't read it already. It lays out the whole foundation for this, for what this specific plastics part of the discussion tonight. And then back in November 2020, just a few months ago, we did screen this movie, The Story of Plastic. There were a couple people who had some technical issues and things like that. And obviously just people have inherent conflicts. And we decided the issue was timely and urgent and important enough that it was worth having another discussion, which is what we're doing tonight. Wanted to give people another opportunity to see the movie, The Story of Plastic. And for those of you who haven't seen it yet, thank you for joining us anyway. Please don't ever feel like you shouldn't join a conversation of ours if you haven't read a book or watched the movie. We welcome you and your presence and your input all the time, not just anyway, all the time. But I wanted to mention, we thought the movie link the screening link was only going to be available through this evening, through the end of our presentation, which is the standard format for these movies. But the producers told us that it's actually available through March 1st. So if you haven't watched it, or you know somebody else who's interested and didn't get a chance to watch it, or you want to watch it again, please feel free to do so. That opportunity exists through the end of the month. So as Jeffrey said, we have more than 140 people registered, and we're very excited you're with us. He also mentioned some of the housekeeping issues, that the program will be recorded. It will be uploaded eventually, but in relatively short order, to the Winnetka Congregational Church YouTube channel. Everybody should be muted when they join, and we request that you please stay muted, because we do expect to be a very large group tonight, so that we can facilitate the discussion and minimize any background noise and distractions for people. And if you find yourself muted when you think you didn't intend to be, please stay that way. Because again, due to the size of the audience, we are keeping everybody on screen. We didn't want to make it a presentation and panelist type of discussion, but it will obviously be hard for us to see everybody on screen. So if you would like to make a comment or ask a question, please do so in the chat. It will be hard for us to see if you physically try to raise your hand in your screen, because there are so many screens to view. So please utilize the chat feature if you can. We wanted to start. I will, Jeffrey, I'm ready to share my screen, I guess. We'll pull up, we have a PowerPoint presentation to, obviously the foundation for tonight's event is this movie, The Story of Plastic. We feel like the movie did a wonderful job of laying out the issues of plastic production, pollution, but different issues along the way. And the question is sort of, what's next? What now? Our first, the agenda tonight is we want to start with some sort of general impressions of the film. We'll open that up to everybody who's here to offer their impressions of the film. And then we'll move to some general discussion questions, and end with some calls to action for everybody to consider as takeaways from this event and the movie. General impressions, comments about the film. Again, we open this up to everybody. This is the discussion part of the event. What are your general impressions of the film? What did you enjoy it? Did it give new information? Were you skeptical about it? What did you like? What did you not like about it? We welcome any and all comments.
And again, you don't have to type your comments, full comment. You can just say, I want to make a comment, and I'll call you in and invite you to participate. Somebody typed into the chat room that it was overwhelming and that it was hard to watch. I agree. Depressing, that seems like a good description, but it's information that we need to hear. Super informative. So Mary typed, it's hard to imagine how we can change the convenience culture that we live in. Carolyn noted, and guys can probably follow along with your chats. It seems like it's a losing battle. Well, we hope to rally together tonight to offer some other ideas. I'm not willing to throw in the plastic bottle yet. All right, so Jen mentioned that contained very important information, that it shed new light on how fossil fuel industry is still impacting plastic use for profit. How true. Janice, you wanted to speak. Why don't you go ahead and come off mute and offer your comment?
Hi, I'm from West Chicago. I'm on the League of Women's Voters in Wheaton, and I'm on the environmental committee here. And watching this movie and seeing how fast we deteriorated with all this garbage in such a short amount of time just seems like it's almost an impossibility to correct. Mm-hmm. I know what I can do. I know it's one person at a time, but it seems like to correct this over the whole world just seems impossible to do.
Isn't it crazy how daunting that seems? Yep. We're gonna talk some more about that as we move through the discussion tonight. Others want to come offline and offer your opinions? Beth offered how maddening to learn about how the industry had tried to shift responsibility entirely to the consumer's shoulders. Janice, I like that it focused on the source of the problem, the petroleum industry. Take out COVID has certainly made it harder. Yes, certainly around my house, it seems like it's gotten much worse. Sarah mentioned that it was hard to watch and that we wish there was more at the end for suggestions going forward. Well, that's part of why we're together tonight to talk specifically about that. How do we buy blueberries without using plastic? Mary offered. Great question. Liz, we're coming up on 7:15. What Perfect. I'm going to suggest is that, again, since the chat will be part of our archive, some people will get a chance to read through others' general impressions. But before we go, I want to do one more call. If anybody would like to offer a suggestion, verbal, or a comment or a reaction, or even a question verbally, now's a good time to do so. All right, Liz, I think the comments are still coming in, but why don't we go ahead and move on to the questions?
Will do. All right. Discussion question number one, as was touched on a little bit in the general impressions. Corporations such as across the board, oil and gas, food, beverage, packaging, consumer goods, retail have been pushing the pro-plastic narrative for decades. Why do you think the media has focused on where plastics end up, the pollution piece of it, rather than where the plastics come from in the first place and why they're created in the first place? Any thoughts on that? Why has the focus always been on the end of this process?
So again, if you want to comment on that, just essentially raise your hand by noting in the chat that you'd like to comment.
The movie made it pretty clear, I thought, that the corporations have been driving the narrative. And since they're the ones making the news, so to speak, that's the news that gets reported.
It makes for dramatic video, right? If you're in the news business, what if it bleeds, it leads? Well, you think about some of the pollution pictures that sometimes become a focus of the media coverage.
Yeah, hi, this is Wiebke. I don't know if that's me you're calling on. I participated in the webinar and the Zoom call by the Shed today, together with the Conservation Foundation. And it seemed to me from what they were saying that there's a historical background for that too, in that I think the plastic producing companies, when plastic became convenient and cheaply to produce and the next great best thing, it seemed at some point in time they were considering there was going to be a problem, but they heavily focused, or the plastic producers heavily focused on recycling and essentially sold that as the magic solution. And I don't know if that was in the 1960s or 1970s, but it seemed that there is a kind of like historical reason playing into this as well.
Yeah, Liz will speak a little bit more about that. In fact, Liz, you might want to add something to it now. But yes, that's a recurring issue with the oil companies, as well as the large packaging packagers like Coca-Cola and Pepsi and Nestle's.
Right. It is. I think, thank you for asking the question. I think I recalled from the timeline, I think one of the great just features of the movie was how it identified with that visual timeline when certain things happened. And I think it was sort of 1975 in the wake of the first Earth Day a few years prior, when there was increased heightened awareness of environmental damage and threats. And it was the packaging and beverage and other petrochemical producers who were like, recycling, that's what you need. That'll take care of all of it. And it was like this like bright, shiny object that we're like, oh, recycling. And I'll throw in a little personal thing. As I mentioned, I come at sustainability entirely from the waste side. I've been a lifelong recycler, and I do think it's important. I just think it's not the panacea, and it's created a lot of complications, but I think it's an important part of the cycle. But so when I read The Story of Plastic, the book for our discussion a year ago, I was so upset, and I felt like such a rube. I felt like I'd been taken advantage of, that I've been promoting events around America Recycles Day for years, only to find out that Keep America Beautiful is an organization that consists of exactly these packaging, beverage, food, petrochemical based manufacturers, that all along we're putting the emphasis on us as consumers and individuals and municipalities, taxpayers, and deflecting from themselves. And I've been angry about it ever since. So that's my 2 cents.
Anyone else want to raise a comment? I can read some of the chats, but please feel free to offer them to the group.
Thank you. And I'll throw out the second question. Obviously, there are multi-part questions here. One of the other big takeaways for me was this assertion that plastics, the demand, that the issue with plastics is driven by supply, not demand. Again, it jives with what the movie's been saying, that the corporations drive the narrative. But I think it was helpful to hear it in those terms, and would appreciate hearing other people's perspectives on that.
Beth, you had a comment?
Sure. I'm sure you may have heard that General Motors is phasing out all gas-powered engines before 2035. The oil industry is in a total panic. They know that their market is absolutely drying up, and the plastic industry is how they're focused on that to keep their profits up. And there are huge numbers of plastic facilities that are being proposed. And one of the things that we can do is to just try to fight those one after another, to prevent more plastic manufacturing facilities from being built.
Thanks, Beth.
Mary commented that she had heard a report on NPR some time ago that plastics was preferable to glass for packaging because of weight. More costly to ship heavier loads. And I think that's a fact, right? In terms of one, cost. I think the message that the movie was also trying to make, though, was you have to look at the full life cycle costs of these product or these packaging choices that we're making. And when you're able to externalize the waste portion of the plastic, there's an incentive for the grocery stores to prefer them, the bottling companies to prefer them, and of course the petroleum companies to prefer those things, because the waste costs are borne by others.
And the cost is less to begin with, maybe less to begin with. Do people remember a few years ago when I felt like when you have to get plastic water bottles when we travel through airports, that it was a few years ago that the plastic in those bottles became noticeably thinner, right? It crinkles more, and they use less of it, and it's lighter weight because it's cheaper for them, but it may also be less recyclable. I mean, just in general, and as Steve said, it's an externality that hasn't been historically taken into account. And hopefully, to me, that's the thing that can and will change to make the systemic difference. So it can't be all on us. We know that, and we have to resist the suggestion, the implication that it is. That's been coming at us for 40, 50 years, and just say no.
Marjorie raises a comment through a question really, and would returning to paper bags only destroy more trees? ? Is paper a viable alternative? Do you have a comment on that, Liz?
My comment is that while it does, there's definitely the downside, not just of the resources used to cut down a tree and potentially the carbon that's released into the air by cutting down that tree, but at base, the trees are a renewable resource in a way that the petroleum, oil-based, is not. Literally, it's not. There's a finite amount of the crude oil in our world, whether we think there's a lot or a little, it's a finite amount, and we can always plant more trees. It is a renewable resource, and to me, therefore, it's a totally different category.
And Terry offers too that, well, what about reusable bags, right? refuse,
right,
reduce, reuse,
right,
and
reuse.
recycle.
Right. And beyond, like a lot of us have thought about reusable bags for a long time. Logistically, there's sometimes, you might forget to bring them, but we're at least aware of the idea of them. But another related and frankly more important use of reusables is in the packaging itself, not just the bags that we're using to transport all of the single-use plastics. So, and some companies are moving toward that direction, going toward the sort of old school delivery model where you send back your packaging. So again, to me, that's another change that has to be made at sort of the corporate level, but we have influence in that.
Abigail asked, is there a movement to tell retailers we will buy more from more ecological packagers, i.e. restaurants, grocery stores, and liquor stores? So that is one of the things we want to talk about when we get to the actions or next steps part.
Right, and I'll make a real quick comment there, Steve. I do know that there's a group named Sunrise that is a group of young adults focused on environmental and economic issues, recognizing that solving issues with both of those are not mutually exclusive. And there's a chapter based in the New Trier area. It's called Sunrise North Shore, and it was founded by a handful of two students, I think, but the group consists of a number of students at New Trier High School. And they recently put out a survey about restaurants using single-use plastic. And we're asking specifically if knowing that a restaurant was choosing to use reusables or compostable or recyclable products instead of single-use disposable ones, would that make a difference in your choice? So there is some movement in that. And I think that will continue, but there is some. Okay. Oh, sorry, I jumped ahead. We have a couple more minutes on one. I apologize. The last question, sort of the sub part of that was, do you think we have a plastic waste problem? Is that the problem? How about that?
And while we're thinking about that question, Liz, I'll jump in with sharing some more comments that we've gotten. Great. Quite a few of them. Let me just pick a couple out. Terry offered that. I don't think there's a big enough market out there to recycle all the plastic that is produced. Just looking at the mountains of plastic in the movie, there's evidence that there's no way that there's a secondary market for all of that trash. I think that's an excellent point, and a point lightly touched on the movie, but also important to consider is that the plastic recyclability breaks down over time. So there are a limited number of times you can use a plastic product. As that same product, it has to be downcycled as in future recycling and eventually thrown away. Very important points. And as we've also mentioned, you've got this tremendous growth going on in terms of additional capacity to produce more plastic. So it's unlikely we're going to recycle our way out of this. So Lori offered that Collective Resources is having a contest right now to shop at retailers, especially food purveyors, who use collective, collective resources. If you buy $100 at the time, if you buy $100 at any time, at any of them and enter, you can win a gift card. So that's a little plug there for what they're doing for their part.
Thanks, Lori.
Janice mentioned too much single use. Absolutely. 40% of the plastic, single use. And that's where a lot of this growth is also. What did we use before plastics? Michael says, and can we go back to some of those practices. Excellent point. I don't know if any of you remember Tupperware and Tupperware parties. That was a big deal in my house. I can remember the shift from reusable glass containers to that initial plastic push. Beth, it's probably time to take a look at the second set of questions.
I'll do that. All right. Again, we've been touching on this already now, but we'll go do a little deeper dive into it. What do you think about the film's assertion that the producers and petrochemical companies have actually promoted recycling as a way to actually increase their plastics production, while at the same time avoiding all responsibility for doing so, distracting and diverting attention from themselves, and keeping the burden and focus on individual consumers and municipalities for fixing the problem by recycling our way out of it? To me, that was one of the biggest, again, the thing that like strikes at my heart. I feel taken advantage of for decades.
Let me add a couple, or speak some of the comments here. Trudy asked, do we even know if our plastic is truly being recycled? Because I must wash out the bottles, does that negate some of the benefit? So both points are good ones. And I think since China's ban on anything but pristinely cleaned recycling and only a few types, much of that has been going to other countries. And the movie, I thought, did a fabulous job of portraying what that means in villages in Indonesia and in the Philippines, in places where these secondary markets have been found, and basically a lot of that unwanted plastic being dumped as trash into the villages. So I think that's a great question, and one that we need to have a better insight into.
Steve, may I jump in on a local issue? Something I've become aware of working in this space more the last couple years. So the movie touches on this. The wonderful the man who started the recycling company, who just sort of spoke the plain truth. I loved him, and he talked about how and other people did, about how the chasing arrows symbol, the number system, that the producers put that symbol on the packaging to show that it can be recyclable. It's capable of being recycled, but it begs the question of whether there's a market for the item, the product, the end result. And that's why there's been such confusion around our country, all over our country, about whether recycling works and does it work or not. Because yet for years, China took our recycling without much question. But it is, I believe, causing sort of a reckoning in that. But real quick, in Illinois, there's some new standards coming out. It's sort of working its way up to the state level. But basically, instead of looking at the chasing arrow number symbol, ignore that, because that's what the producers want you to look at. And that's not the answer of whether it's recyclable. What answers whether it's recyclable is whether your hauler in your community takes it. And the much narrower category of plastics specifically that are recyclable largely in our areas, you can define them according to their function or their shape, not the number. Think of it as tubs, jugs, jars, and bottles. Those are the 4 kinds of hard plastics that we can recycle safely in our area. Tubs, jugs, jars, bottles. That's it. If anything else, like again, it was as the man was pulling sort of samples of the plastic out of the bales in the warehouse, saying this one has, a little screen and it's got plastic film associated, all these. So finding pristine, uncontaminated plastic that's the same chemical composition such that somebody can turn it into something else is really, really hard. So think tubs, jugs, bottles, jars. That's what we need to look at. It's a much narrower universe than we ever thought of.
I'll share a couple of comments here. Again, feel free to raise your hand and make your comment to the group. Just typing in the chat that you'd like to share something. The discrepancy in expenditures on recycling versus production and was huge. And I think the point there being production from new plastic, virgin plastic. Or was that comment, Patty, that the investment in recycling versus the investment in new production capacity was hugely different? Maybe you could clarify for us. In some instances, there are competing biodegradable or compostable products as a replacement for plastics. How can we promote those? Is there research in this area that might or should be subsidized? I think those are great questions. We're actually going to talk about that when we get to the actions and next steps section of this.
And I will say again, I'll jump in and say, I know there's movement, there are discussions happening about the extent to which plant-based plastic is really recyclable, to make sure there is no greenwashing, to try to reduce the confusion. It's confusing now, but it's something that's being worked on in our state specifically to try to clarify what is truly compostable versus recyclable versus what must go to landfill and why. It's in the works.
There's another question about subsidies. And Terry asked, in the movie talks about fossil fuels subsidies resulting in lower cost plastics. Does anyone know what type of fossil fuel subsidies in the US are provided to the oil and gas industry? So no takeout food containers, the clear lids, for example, Beth?
Correct. Exactly. Yeah. They look like they should be totally recyclable, right? Again, I think the gentleman, I forget his name, I want to say Kent. I don't know if that's right. But Kent, who said, this looks like it should be recyclable. How can you tell this kind of plastic from this kind of plastic? They look the same to you and me, but they're not. And so when you look at those plastic, that's the hard plastic, some's black, some's clear. It seems to me it's the same kind of consistency as a water bottle or any other bottle or jug that I might have, but it's not. It's just not. So that's, tubs, jugs, bottles, jars.
And again, the point over and over in the movie seems like we need to reinforce again. It's just the idea that we can't recycle our way out of this problem. That is not the solution. We're making too much of the stuff. We have to look at other ways of doing business, a different kind of economic cycle. Even if your waste hauler takes certain items, Janice wrote, for recycling, it doesn't mean that the item will be recycled. And that was one of the points in the movie. As they separated out those different types of plastic, some of those bales were just sitting there and the man said, you can't find a market for this stuff. Throwing away the tops and the plastic bottles and those little rings, I think those end up in rivers, etc. And then sea creatures get stuck in them. Is that correct? And I think that, yes, what we saw reinforced in the movie is that you've got this tremendous amount of pollution coming out of nations around the world, but certainly the preponderance of it coming out of about 5 countries in Asia. And mostly because they don't have good infrastructure for managing the kind of waste that has been sent to them from the US and Europe and other developed countries to them, essentially dumping our waste on their shores. And then it's getting washed into the oceans. Again, this is Jeannie added, in some parts of the world, they are converting trash into energy. The movie doesn't address this that much. That is true. It's particularly true in Europe and in Germany in particular, in Europe. There's a focus on trying to take advantage of that. The petrochemical basis for plastic. I think the thing to keep in mind is that that's another burning of fossil fuels, right? And we're trying to reorient our economy away from burning fossil fuels because of the impact on the climate. So while it may be a potential solution for dealing with the plastic problem, it's just another way of burning fossil fuels, which is something we're trying to get away from. Go ahead.
But I'll also say, Jeannie, hi, Jeannie. I think waste to energy is a really important, just like recycling is an important piece of the puzzle. It's just not the only piece. And it's been inappropriate and sneaky and awful of the producers to give us the impression that that would be sufficient. But it's also not, I don't think it's a good idea to say it's not appropriate at all. We need to fix our systems. Similarly, Jeannie, I agree, we need to incorporate waste to energy as one of many solutions for dealing with our waste, but we need to make sure we're not creating more of a problem if we're releasing additional chemicals or emissions into the air. As again, one of the gentlemen said in the movie, that sure, you can burn it, but it's releasing a lot of toxic stuff into the air. So you need a whole other system to maybe try to manage those emissions. That is still worth looking at, but it creates a whole other piece to deal with.
So Liz, before you read the next question, I just want to note for everyone that Bill just posted a link to a site that speaks to subsidies and through some of the tax breaks, I think.
How might we reimagine a future without single-use plastics? What kind of policies and systems might we need to implement locally and beyond to help get us there? And then the last question is, can we, quote, turn off the tap? And that quote is from the movie. One of the young activists, I believe in the Philippines, I forgot, Philippines or Indonesia. She's basically asking, can we stop our use of it in the first place? Can we turn off our desire for it? As opposed to just, again, focus on the recycling. So again, this is the hard part. So can people imagine a future without single-use plastic? Again, what did we do before it? And now that we have it, how do we appropriately use it or not?
So Lori jumped right in with one. She said, what about a deposit system that rewarded customers for taking cans, bottles, plastic containers back to the store for dollars?
It's a really good question.
And I will have an update on that during our call to action session tonight.
Great. I will too. I'll include some stuff at the state level on the bottle bills. But yes, it's a great idea. I see somebody raising a hand.
The industry has fought the bottle return bills for decades. They work.
Right.
And Lori also mentioned that they work in many states already. Illinois is slow on this. So that's certainly an opportunity for discussion when we get to actions. Similar to that, are there laws that require companies to take back all of their product packaging? Though I don't know how you would trace a package back to its origin. That's a great question, Michael, and I think it's something worth further conversation. So Patty says that we're in Kenya, where no plastic bags are allowed. People told us the amount of garbage was dramatically reduced. What about a system that includes the cost of recycling and remediation in the cost of plastic? So remove that externality, that incentive to create waste, and make sure that whoever was responsible remains responsible. I think it's a great point. Using bulk bins in grocery stores where people can buy food and use mason jars and other containers so they don't need to buy items in plastic wrapping, Jen offered.
Steve, I see a hand up, Mary Monday.
Okay, Mary?
One thing I remember when I was a child, we didn't have things like strawberries in the winter. We had turnips, I don't know, whatever, but bananas. I think we might have had bananas, but fruits, we had citrus in the winter, but you didn't have all of the array of products that we now have become accustomed to because they get shipped across the world. And we're accustomed to having everything that we want to have in every season. And I think that without plastics, I mean, I had asked my question earlier, how do you buy blueberries? I meant, how do you buy blueberries in the winter if they're not encased in something? There would be so much. So that's an issue. And also earlier, I believe that sanitation is a big issue for bringing your own jars and containers into stores, because then if you take something home and it is contaminated in some way, if it wasn't in a proper, in a container that they have control over, then liability becomes a big issue for the retailer. It's very complex, this issue of, I love the idea of buying in bulk, but I don't think retailers are too happy about that for liability purposes. So I'll be quiet.
No, it's great. There aren't simple solutions, right? That's a great point, Mary. And it's hard to give up conveniences you've become accustomed to. And so that's going to be a challenge, right? Disposable diapers, Janice offered. I miss my tidy wash. Is that what it is? Tidy wash? When I was a mother, I had great pick diaper washed and brought back. And it doesn't exist anymore. Yep. I wonder what percent.
There are a few diaper services, but they are few and far between for sure. Right? It takes a special person in this day and age to use those.
Jeannie mentioned that she wondered what percentage of the plastic waste that is from healthcare, and is that all incinerated for safety's sake? I don't know the answer to that, Beth.
I think it usually is. Almost everything that is that has that healthcare could be contaminated in some way is sadly incinerated. It's a big issue. And Jeannie, I know, there was the movie we screened a couple years ago where I forget the name of it. Jeannie, you'll remember it. Put it in the chat if you can. It was a young, say it again?
A Clean Bin Project?
Clean Bin Project.
Yeah,
so thanks, Steve. Right, it's so good. So it's a young couple that competed against each other to see who could produce the least amount of waste over the course of a year. And the husband was definitely sort of prone to kind of push the envelope anyway. He sort of justified some decisions, but actually what ultimately cost him the competition was an injury he suffered because he ended up with medical waste. Remember that, Jeannie? It overflowed the bin because he couldn't get rid of it. Oh, and I'll also remember, I'm sorry, but the bulk of his wife's waste, who went so far as to like make her own toothpaste as part of this competition, she was all in. By the way, they didn't have kids. It was easier for them to do this. But she also, honestly, the bulk of her waste was the packaging from birth control pills. That was almost her entire waste for the year. That was it. And his was the medical, he had like a neck brace and an arm.
Good memory.
Yeah. So yeah, I think the medical waste is a real issue. Yeah. It's a huge issue.
Especially now.
I don't know how you get past that safety aspect of it.
Yeah.
Mary's concern about blueberries in plastic containers, Susan offered that fruit used to come in pressed paper containers. So maybe there's some that are there.
Some of them do, like in farmers markets, right? Farmers markets and produce stands, you're more likely to find those cardboard containers still.
Molly asked this question: what if producers were made by law responsible for the end of life of the products that they're making, internalizing versus externalizing the costs? Things would change quickly, she hypothesizes. But I'm not sure that the lobbyists would be all for it. Yes, great point. But it really comes down to who's bearing the cost. And right now we can see it's the planet. Janice, you had
when you were talking about the medical waste, I just started a new drug, and it comes in so much packaging. You can't pick it up from a pharmacy, and it comes in a huge box, a styrofoam case, all these plastic cooling cases, multiple boxes inside, and not a reusable injectable. It's a shot every single time. And the amount of waste is driving me crazy. It's been 5 months and I cannot figure this out, because before I used to take shots, they had a reusable auto inject, and now all the auto injects are throwaways, so it's even more waste, and it has to stay cold. And I'm flabbergasted on how much for one little shot.
Wow. Janice, may I jump in again? I needless to say, I share that frustration. And anytime I get something, either on a medical side, there was one time I ordered a necklace that was not even breakable. And it literally came in 6 separate layers of plastic packaging from Amazon. It was obscene. And it came from like Banana Republic. And I took pictures of the layers of packaging and said, why? It's a cloth necklace. But so I honestly, I recommend emailing them, like contacting them and saying, why is this necessary?
I wrote an email. It was driving me insane. I took pictures and I said, can I get it delivered to the Target CVS? Just, get a bunch shipped there and have them store it so I could just pick one up. Do 10 at a time and I'll just pick them up there.
Thank you.
No, nothing.
Don't give up.
That's my 2 cents. Sorry.
Don't give up.
There is in the chat some conversation about frozen products and the plastic wrap packaging that they come in, the film, if you will. So not quite as bulky or, much plastic is used in some of these fresh packaging solutions, but still a single-use plastic. And the question about how are those able to be recycled? And I think, Liz, you know a lot about that. You might want to comment on film plastic recycling.
The film plastic is, again, a separate category of plastics. One of the things that's important to note that the movie doesn't really get into, because it's obviously trying to move the focus away from recycling, but to the extent recycling is an option for at least keeping some items out of landfill and reusing them in some capacity, the plastic film is recyclable. Again, it's just there is a market for it. It's just that the channel through which it's collected is not our sort of traditional recycling or curbside recycling where our hard plastics are recycled. The plastic film typically is taken by grocery stores. They use it as the raw material to create their plastic bags. But I was pleasantly surprised by the range of plastics that is ultimately recyclable, because again, for lay people, they don't look like they're the same type of plastic or the same composition, but they are. But they're the kinds of things that need to go to the grocery store rather than in a curbside bin. Typically, the way those work with the grocery stores is grocery stores partner most often that I know of with a company named Trex, Trex, which uses plastic bags as its feedstock for creating alternate wood products, decks, planks. So my recollection is 2,000 plastic grocery bags can get turned into one 2x4 by 16 foot long plank that then becomes decking and chairs and tables and things like that. So Trex runs contests through our schools each year to educate and create awareness about the recyclability of those kinds of plastic films and bags. And that contest is happening this year. It's just obviously has lower participation because of the vagaries of in-person school this year. But there are a lot of those collection bins around Winnetka. Also, again, a little bit lighter right now than usual because of the virus. But in general, that's an effort that our schools, the community house has one, the libraries had one in the past. And there are collection bins for those kinds of film with a comprehensive list of what kind of film can be recycled through that program.
So Susan asked, does that include frozen food bags?
The baseline, one of the reasons the plastic film is so hard to recycle is because so like hard plastics, you can recycle them if they have some liquid in them. You don't want it to be, sticky, but it could be wet with water. That's not considered contamination, but water in plastic film is contamination. Any sort of crumbs in plastic film is contamination. So the problem with the plastic film or bags that has been used specifically in contact with food is whether there's any sort of residue left behind. And if there is, can it be wiped off? Can it be brushed off? If it's greasy, you know, probably not. So the frozen food, I think you could probably, but you might, there's a little bit more labor to really try to make sure there's no moisture, you know, no ice left, no peas left in the bag, and just make sure the bag is truly clean. It needs to be clean and dry. So that gets harder to do whenever it's been in touch with food to begin with. But thank you for asking that.
It's a great point. I like to cut mine, rinse mine, and dry it. And then, you know, you can wrap it.
I'll do on one of the cereal bags. Cereal, if people eat dry cereal, I have teenagers, so we have some cereal in our house. The plastic bags that are the inserts to cereal boxes, those actually are recyclable. And again, that's a perfect example of the kind of plastic film or bag that I wouldn't think is the same as a Ziploc bag or a newspaper sleeve or a dry cleaning bag, but it is. And if you like, as Steve just said, to sort of separate it, you take those plastic inserts are actually a rectangle, and you can rip that, you open one seam and you open the other seam, and it turns into one basically 11 by 18 strip of plastic that you can brush the dust from the cereal off and absolutely recycle it very easily. The dry crumbs are easier to get rid of. And when you can flatten it and you don't have to deal with corners, then that obviously makes it doable. And it's as my kids say, it's very satisfying.
So Abigail mentioned that in Chicago, the grocery stores seem to have stopped accepting plastic film. Were you aware of that?
Well, so in Chicago, and I believe in Evanston, they've had a plastic bag ban. So it is a different situation than in many of our villages in the area. We do not have bans where most of us live, but the ban in Illinois, or sorry, in Chicago and Evanston, it's not a complete ban, but they're basically, and I don't know the details, so I don't want to misstate it. And if anybody knows the specifics, please chime in. But basically, there's a tax that's charged if you want to use a plastic bag, and certain grocers and retailers of a certain size, above a certain square footage, are prohibited from using certain bags and things like that. So it's definitely had an effect. But I remember one of the effects was that I think one of the metrics was sort of the thickness of the bag. And so one of the responses was for retailers to start using thicker bags. It basically exempted them from the requirement, and it still meant that they were using plastic, and even worse plastic bags than they might otherwise. Mm-hmm. But I do believe in the city in Evanston that has changed the situation a bit.
So Liz, as we get ready to move on to talking about actions that we could take, I'll share one more comment here from Jill. She mentioned that a company, Dispatch Goods, developed a successful reusable takeout food container system for San Francisco, and that they're exploring the Chicago market.
Thank you.
And that there is a list, I guess, of restaurants.
Yeah, there's a webinar happening tomorrow night. At, I believe it's 5:30 in the afternoon. Dispatch is involved, and maybe the Shed. I've heard it from a lot of different sources, but I recall tomorrow at 5:30, there's a webinar specifically on restaurant use of plastics and to-go containers and utensils and things like that.
Jill,
so thank you for mentioning that.
For participating restaurants, it'll be helpful.
Right. Okay. All right. So the rest of our discussion tonight is going to focus on what we're calling calls to action. This is something that actually the story of plastic producers ask us to do, so that people sort of walk away with a specific action item or to do. So we've organized ours into personal or individual actions you can take, group, collective actions you can take. Each of those we'll spend about 5 minutes on. And then the last one, about 15 minutes, we'll talk about citizenship or advocacy and contacting elected officials, using your voice to effectuate change. And both Jeffrey and I will talk about some legislation at the state and national level in that regard. So this slide is intended to show resources that are available to make some personal changes. On the right-hand side of the screen is the Shed Aquarium Action Guide that was recently released as part of its Let's Shed Plastic initiative. And as you can see, it has some steps that you can take, and it actually gives you the opportunity to make a pledge to specifically reduce your use of one type of single-use disposable plastic, like straws, bottles, coffee cups, utensils, bags, takeout containers, etc. I also included a few other resources on this page, and I've got some physical real-world examples of things that I've started doing to reduce my use of plastic. On the bottom left of the screen, are these True Earth laundry strips. They come in a cardboard container, and they are concentrated strips of laundry soap. They do arrive from Canada. They are not in our country, but there's no plastic at all. And these strips, you just rip them up and you put them in your dispenser just like you would a liquid. And all of the clothes come out smelling lovely and clean. And I love it. They come once a month. You can get them with whatever frequency you want. True Earth laundry strips, sorry. In the center of the screen are some wooden utensils. Many people have heard of bamboo utensils, which I like a lot. The ones that are shown in the image and the ones that I have here in my hands, they are, I forget what kind of wood they are, I apologize, but they're really like popsicle sticks. And so they're lighter weight. They can remind you of your childhood. Like, they're just wonderful. And I find them easier to use than the bamboo serviceware, which can be kind of bulky. The ones that I have are by a company called Would You. And they come in these cool cylindrical containers, one for forks, one for knives, one for spoons. So I started using them because I do a lot of events, and obviously wanted to move away from the single-use items for that. A couple other fun examples. I love these. People may have seen these. They're these Swedish dishcloths. I've seen a lot more of them. These came from the second company listed, called Free the Ocean. Free the Ocean is a nonprofit that does work on ocean pollution and restoration and conservation. And Free the Ocean, I like because they don't just have products that you can use to make a difference, but you can sign up for their email list. It's just freetheocean.com. And if you sign up for their mailing list, every morning when you wake up, you'll have an email from them with a trivia question about the ocean. Some of it's about marine life, some of it's about pollution, some of it's historical. And if you answer that question, whether you get it right or wrong, you're funding the removal of one piece of plastic from the ocean. So I've been having a ridiculously good time with this for the last few months, and you can click through and find some amazing sort of, National Geographic type images that really show some amazing scenes of our ocean life. So Free the Ocean has that. And then they are one of many companies that sell these Swedish dishcloths. These are made from wood, cellulose, and paper. So they dry hard because they're wood, but when they get wet, they soften. And so they're basically a good replacement for a lightweight sponge. You can't really scrub with them too well, but in lieu of a dishcloth, in lieu of a sponge, if you just want to wipe up a spill, they're absorbent, they're reusable, and at the end of their lives, they're compostable. So there are those. And then the one other item I got from Free the Ocean recently are these, another scrubbing device. They're coconut scrubbers. And so these work where those don't. And they work really well. And they also, they're just made of coconut fiber. They come in packs of 3 or 4. I've been using one for a couple of months. This is the package it comes in. And I used one for a couple of months, and it's just now falling apart after a lot of scrubbing uses. So there are a lot of companies that can help at least try to move away from plastic. And obviously at base, we want to try to consume less in the first place, right? Keep it in the ground. So there are some companies that I do believe have the right idea at heart to try to make it easier. So these are some solutions I've had, I wanted to share. I like them a lot, but I'm sure that other people have lots of ideas also for solutions or questions also.
Carolyn offered that Earth Hero has a lot of products like the ones that you talked about. So,
great, thank you.
And Rose included a link called the Loop Store. It's a program for consumers seeking to reduce their waste. That's another good resource.
Great. So I think we'll go on to the group one now.
Mm-hmm.
Right, great. So, oh, sorry, I did not do that. I did not do that. Sorry, calls to action on the public group or collective side. Again, in line with the initiative, the Let's Shed Plastic initiative by the Shed Aquarium, that program really focuses on cleanup events, beach cleanups, river cleanups, park cleanups. And our Go Green Winnetka group has focused on those too. It's kind of a bread and butter activity for our local Go Green groups. Go Green Wilmette has been doing amazing beach cleanups in Gilson Beach for the last few years. They evolve with the times. We did this one, the pictures in this on this slide. All right. So anyway, in terms of collective and group activities, we encourage everybody to join a group, create a group where you are, join a cleanup event, join a one-off event if you want. There are many sponsored by the Shed Aquarium. And again, if you go to the website, the Shed Aquarium website, they have information about their Let's Shed Plastic initiative, including some cleanup events specifically if you're in areas that make it easy for you to take advantage of those. The FCR acronym next to Shed is the Friends of the Chicago River. They also do a lot of water-based conservation cleanup events. And then GGW, Go Green Winnetka, it's also Go Green Wilmette. Again, a lot of our local Go Green groups host cleanup events at beaches. In Winnetka, we're looking at doing them in some of the park areas along the Green Bay Trail as the weather gets nicer. And so we welcome everybody to join those events. And then similarly, and maybe a step up would be joining or creating a group that is going to move these initiatives forward in connection with your community or your school or your business or another organization that you're involved with. Basically, Steve and I are here because I don't know how many, 6 years ago, Steve said, will you come work with me on our Winnetka Congregational Church Green Team? and here we are. And now Steve's with Go Green Winnetka, and we have just a really robust, dialogue and groups working on these issues. So and Beth Drucker at Go Green Wilmette, this is Beth's passion, is getting these kinds of groups going at the community level. So if you're on this call, on this Zoom, and you're in a community that doesn't have a citizens group that's focused on environmental issues, email me, I'll put you in touch with Beth. This is her jam. This is what we do, is to get these kinds of conversations going in communities where they're not happening already, and making it easy for people to do that and find like-minded people who can help move things along so that you don't feel like you're doing it all by yourself and you're not reinventing the wheel.
Liz, may I add something there? If folks,
yes.
Another way you can help in groups is if you belong to a group that's not a green group, like a homeowners association or anything, you can be a gentle but persistent voice to help them adopt more plastic-free practices for their social events.
Thank you, Jeffrey. That's what I meant to be saying, and it probably wasn't clear, but the last bullet point where it's green team, you can sort of, within another organization that doesn't have an environmental focus, you can help create a little bit of awareness on that front. So come join us. All right, now we'll go to the last slide. Sorry, I apologize, I keep going the wrong way. The calls to action on the advocacy or citizenship side. I like this idea very much. It's sort of going beyond what change you can do yourself in your home, even in your community, but what extra step can you take? And so we'll focus a little bit on sort of two bills that have been were previously introduced, and Jeffrey's going to give the status of one at the federal level, and then I will talk a little bit about one at the state level. So, okay. Jeffrey.
Thanks, Liz. You see on the screen the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. Those numbers do not apply because those numbers happen to be the numbers for the last Congress. At the end of each Congress, legislation that has not moved does not exist anymore. It needs to be reintroduced in the new Congress. So the new Congress started January 3rd, and the principal sponsor of Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act was Representative Alan Lowenthal, a Democrat from California. I called his office yesterday, and the staffer I talked to there said Representative Lowenthal will reintroduce the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act in this new Congress, but he has not done so yet. So be looking for that, but not by those numbers you see on your screen. Senator Durbin was one of the 10 principal Senate co-sponsors of the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act in the last Congress, and there were a couple of dozen other representatives, House members, who were principal sponsors with Representative Lowenthal. So be looking for that one. What does it do? You can actually find the details of this bill by going to the Surfrider Foundation. I'm going to put that in the chat here. The Surfrider Foundation is the surfers' lobby. Everybody's got a lobby. I think ministers should have a lobby. The Surfriders Foundation, their website has an excellent description of the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. Let me share just a couple of bullet points about this act. It would require producers of packaging, containers, and food service products to design, manage, and finance waste and recycling programs. So the producers would have to fund the recycling system. It would create a nationwide beverage container refund program, nationwide. It would ban certain single-use plastic products that are not recyclable. It would ban single-use plastic carryout bags. It would prohibit plastic waste from being shipped to developing countries. The United States would have to take care of its own plastic waste. I was going to say something else. But place a temporary pause on new plastic facilities until the EPA updates and creates important regulations on those facilities. I mean, this is a massive bill with big implications. So watch for that one. I want to put in the chat here some other national websites. One is called plasticfreepresident.org. This is a national effort to get President Biden to become the first president to commit to a plastic-free future. That man has a lot on his plate right now, of course, but getting plastic pollution before this new administration will take a public campaign, and we can all be part of that. There's some other ones, plasticpollutioncoalition.org. So that's for the national level. Liz, did you want to talk about the styrofoam bill at the state level?
Sure. So I was curious. I had, like Jeffrey, we had talked about the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act at the federal level, and I was curious what, if anything, was happening at the state level. So I'll tell you all, if you're curious, literally, I did a Google search, like plastics legislation, Illinois. And what I came up with was similar to what Jeffrey said, a bill that was introduced at the last session in 2020. Ironically, the timing was such for both the national and the state bills that they were introduced in February of 2020, and then obviously went nowhere, as most legislation did last year for obvious reasons. So the state senator in Illinois who introduced the bill that's referred to here, and again, the number is irrelevant, but the substance of the ban is that it would ban polystyrene, styrofoam containers from as takeout containers from restaurants, and then there is a bottle bill or bottle deposit bill as part of it. For what it's worth, I believe my understanding is the issue of a bottle bill or deposit bill. Bottle deposit bill in Illinois is actually introduced literally every year, and it's shot down so quickly by the lobbyists that most of us don't even hear about it, honestly. I've asked a couple times, and that's what I've been told. So this is another iteration of it. Luckily, the state senator who introduced it is our state senator for Winnetka and our district. It's Senator Laura Fine, who's based in Glenview. I apologize. And I have met her through our Go Green groups, actually. And so I emailed her a couple days ago and asked what the status of the bill was. And she said, again, as Jeffrey said, it died at the end of the last session because nothing happened on it, but she is planning to reintroduce it this month in this session. And she's not sure, but she said she believes potentially there may be other bills, sort of related bills being introduced. She just doesn't know specifically about them, but if those, to the extent those happen, that will also be in the next couple weeks. So hopefully we will hear sooner rather than later if there's some other initiatives at the state level.
And Liz, I just found out more information about this today from the Illinois Environmental Council. Their Clean Water Policy Director, Iana Simba, reports that the House sponsor for the styrofoam ban bill is Representative Gong Gershowitz, who I think is also local to the North Shore, right?
I agree, yes.
And Iana Simba also told me that the bill to institute a deposit for bottles, cans, and beverages will be introduced in this session as a separate bill by Representative Delia Ramirez.
Awesome. Thank you.
So, and I would also note that I called my own state rep about these things yesterday, and she knows me. She takes my calls, answers my emails, and this isn't about me or her, but the general point is we can all build a personal relationship with our state senators and state reps, because they are much closer to the people than members of Congress are, just because there are they represent fewer people. And if you build a relationship with your state rep now, you can use that relationship, leverage it in the future for all kinds of issues you might be interested in. But they need to know who you are, that you're friendly, that you want to work together with them. And a lot of things can happen through citizen action if you know personally your state rep and state senator.
That's an excellent point, Jeffrey, and a wonderful segue. So our next slide is about making your voices heard and specifically facilitating contacting your representative. Obviously, this screen is somewhat Winnetka specific, but it may be relevant to other people, in our immediate, in our neighboring communities. The first section, sorry, I have to move my screen. In terms of local, I didn't limit it to Winnetka. Obviously, the message is you can communicate with your local governing bodies, the commercial entities in your community, the other organizations in your community, and make it known that this is a priority for you. You can email, you can start a petition, you can go to a public meeting. In Winnetka, our village council has made it relatively easy to communicate with the council. There's one email address that you can use, and any message you send gets distributed and shared with all of our council members. So not every place is that easy, but you can communicate with your elected officials and private officials too, again, and just make your voice heard. And then again, this is the contact information for our state representative, Robin Gable, who's based in Evanston, and is, by the way, a huge environmental proponent. She has, I think she typically gets 100% approval rating from the Illinois Environmental Council each year. She sponsors and introduces a number of environmentally focused bills each year. And then again, State Senator Fine, also a friend of environmental issues. And then on the federal level, U.S. Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky and our two federal U.S. Senators, Tammy Duckworth and Dick Durbin. I'll reiterate and echo what Jeffrey said, but I'll also say, don't feel like it's great to have a personal relationship, but they will listen to you even if you don't. You can call them and leave a message and say, I'm a constituent and I care. And what's your take on this? And they will respond. And then obviously there's that much more benefit if you can develop a personal relationship, because again, you can do something like I did and say, thank you, Senator Fine. Can you let me know the status of this bill for this amazing presentation we're doing tonight, so I can share the information with all of these people who want to know more about it. So don't be shy about that. Okay, shall we go to the last one? close enough. Sorry, Steve, I think you're muted.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Liz,
there's some comments.
Yeah, before you go, I just wanted to note that Rose shared that the Illinois Environmental Council and the Illinois chapter of the Sierra Club are also great resources for learning about environmental legislation in Illinois.
Thank you very much so. And obviously for people who are more interested, almost all of these organizations have newsletters, mailing lists, you know, you get on them and you can be kept apprised of legislation or issues that they're working on.
And Liz, Gloria included a link to something that a meeting tomorrow. I believe the title is "Moving Beyond Plastics."
That's the restaurant one that I mentioned that the dispatch group is a part of. That's what it's called, Moving Beyond Plastics. But I believe it's focused on the restaurant industry.
And she included a link here for us.
Great. Yeah, I think restaurants are a big one. Obviously, it's a big issue, and again, in the context of a virus and one that we are still learning about and didn't know much, knew even less about months ago. It's understandable that there would be concerns about reusables and feeling a comfort with disposable items. And I think that's okay too, by the way. There's no judgment with anybody. I was comfortable using my single-use plastic bags for a little while in the spring myself. I didn't really like it, but I was like, it's a choice we have to make. But what I'm not okay with is the plastics industry leveraging this and saying, oh, we need this much more and here's why. I'm not okay with that. But there's no judgment about the comfort level that people have, to just live their lives. But it's just that there can be some other alternatives if you just kind of shift things a little bit. So, all right. So here's a nice little timeline. I know the text is a little small, but hopefully it's okay on your screens. I know many of you have seen this Throwaway Living cover from Life magazine in 1955. I saw it relatively recently, a few years ago, and it was after I was involved in these initiatives and waste reduction initiatives specifically. So I remember when I first saw that cover in the last maybe 5 years or so, it physically sickens me to see this thrown up in the air like confetti, and to think about what those pieces in those pictures, in that picture, are doing, still sitting in a landfill somewhere, And then in the 70s and 80s, as we talked about, in part as a way to deflect criticism of the damage and threat to the environment from this plastic production and waste and pollution, the beverage and packaging companies shifted attention to these municipal taxpayer-funded recycling programs. And then again, as we discussed in 2018, things shifted very significantly when China went offline and banned the import of other plastics and materials. The world immediately lost 50% of the recycling capacity that had previously been available when China shut that down. So it was striking. And then where we are now in 2021, as the movie showed and as we've talked about tonight, the oil and gas industry recognizes that their production is not going to be needed to fuel our cars as much, and they're doubling down on the production of single-use plastics in the meantime. And Beth alluded to this early on in the discussion. The movie says 325 new or expanded facilities for plastics production are online in the US in the next 4 years at this point, 4 years. So we have our work cut out for us. So, and then Jeffrey found this amazing advertisement, this commercial that the American Beverage Association just put out. I had trouble screen sharing it from my screen, so I'm going to stop sharing, and Jeffrey's going to jump in and share his screen so that we all can see this just 30-second short.
So I saw this commercial 2 consecutive evenings on the NBC National News. So that tells me that the beverage industry is gearing up, probably in my estimation, to get ahead of any national anti-plastic legislation, such as the Break Free from Plastic Act. This is my suspicion.
Environment. That's why at America's beverage companies,
our bottles are made to be remade.
Not all plastic is the same. we're carefully designing our bottles to be 100% recyclable, including the caps.
They're collected and separated from other plastics,
so they can be turned back into material that we use to make new bottles.
That completes the circle and reduces plastic waste.
Please help us get every bottle back.
The truth is, what the Redditors did here.
We need to reduce plastic waste in the environment.
That's why America's beverage company.
Up. So this came up, everybody just, in one of our last planning meetings, the last couple of days, as Jeffrey said, he saw this video and we thought it was an appropriate coda to this discussion, and sort of, again, open it up a little bit. We're winding up, but I'm curious what people's takes are on that, because actually there's a little bit of disagreement within even our three co-hosts for tonight on how to interpret that advertisement. So if anybody has comments on that, I can't see it when I'm sharing my screen. So if there are any comments, please let me know.
Jerry suggested, Liz, that if the American Beverage Association wants to get their bottles back, that we mail all of our bottles back to them. I think that's fair.
I noticed that the woman, I think the woman who's at the last thing she says is help us get our bottles back, right? So the it's still on us. It's still telling us what we can do to make a difference. And it's saying they're taking some steps, but I would question, again, how much of the investment are they putting to recycling facilities or not even recycling facilities, but as opposed to new facilities to produce plastic, what's the ratio? It's probably much less that they're putting on the recycling and capture side. But I will note, I looked this up yesterday because I was curious about it, and the American Beverage Association is partnering with two recognized and renowned environmental organizations, which are the World Wildlife Fund and the Closed Loop Partners. And so I say, at least with, while I'm skeptical about the commercial, I have to think there's something different that they're doing. It's not just the same old, because I don't think World Wildlife Fund and Closed Loop Partners would be involved if there weren't something slightly different. That's my take, but I don't want to get sucked in either, because clearly I've been duped before.
And as we've discussed, Liz, the main point for everyone is that as we just left a page talking about what we can do collectively as citizens in sponsoring legislation, we have to recognize that this isn't the first time around for the industry, and they're going to fight it hard, and their dollars are going to go into swaying public opinion about why it's okay to continue to consume all the plastic that they want to produce. And that's the cycle we must break.
That's a perfect conclusion, Steve. What Steve said.
Yeah, I thank you all for being a part of this circle of concern and conversation and mutual support, learning tonight. Especially thank Liz Kunkel and Steve Hewells for facilitating and preparing all that they did. Let's keep coming together from time to time so that we can continue to get to know one another, build a movement here on the North Shore among friends who are really trying to make a difference in every level, that individual, group, and citizen level. Liz, Steve, any concluding words from you?
Just thanks everybody for your participation.
And thank you, everybody.
Go to the Winnetka Congregational Church YouTube channel, and you can see in a few days, this video will be there. A video of this recording tonight.